thank you all for being here. I'm really excited about this talk.
Mm.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Samantha Sacchi, and I'm the founder of the Self Club. And the Self Club is one of those spaces that aims to give you the tools, the digital and physical spaces, and the education, the knowledge about how to better know ourselves, understand who we are, and just be a little more emotionally intelligent, and then how to bring that out into the world. All right. My biggest passion as a coach and facilitator and educator is really allowing you to get to know yourself and like own everything that you are so you can bring it out into the world. And today we have Michael, I could say this in Italian, Bartura. Michael Bartura, which I'm really excited to have this chat with you, Michael, because you are just brilliant and you have so much experience. And I think, wow, there's so much that people can learn from you. And I hope that we can pull out some of those gems today. And if you'd like to go ahead and just introduce yourself, tell people who you are, what you do.
I appreciate the introduction. I feel little bit hot behind the ears, as they say. Um, I'll start with my surname because you mentioned it. So it's actually Bartura, but the problem is, I don't think my parents realized that I was going to leave Israel. I grew up in Israel and live overseas. So my first name is Eran and my surname is Bartura, and that's not a name to try and live in an Anglo-Saxon country with. So I'm using my middle name, and everyone is calling me Bartura. But Bartura is actually Aramaic, and it's a translation of the name Bergman.
Mm.
My grandfather was a biblical scholar, and the family lore, I'd like to think that it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of story. The family lore is that according to some biblical sources, the devil cannot pronounce Aramaic. So he translated the family name to Aramaic, and that's what basically Bartura. Bartura means son of the mountain. If you think of Tura, towers, and high places, that sort of stuff.
Mm.
My background, I worked in therapy. I was a therapist for about 12 years, mostly in emotional kind of heavy emotion release and physical therapies and stuff. And then went into management. Partly because I got bored with people wreathing on my table while I was working with them doing the tissue work. So I did that for about 20 years. But throughout that process, I was always fascinated with, what makes the human mind tick and what makes relationship work between people. So I got to do a lot of that sort of work as part of my management roles. And then for the last probably 6 years, I've been full-time in training and coaching one way or another, mostly through an institute called the Asian Leadership Institute, which is based out of Chiang Mai. And I think we're here to talk about, consciousness, future, meaning, hopefulness, what's real and what's not, all that sort of stuff. So I'm really excited. And one of the reasons why I'm excited is because we tend to be so busy talking about what we do and what we need to get and, like where we at and what we want to do with our life and all that, that we tend to forget to be present with the experience of what is the being of human being, and allow ourselves to sort of explore that realm when you realize that you can be conscious of what's going on while being conscious of being conscious. And if we can get ourselves to that sweet spot in terms of how we understand the way that we think and how we understand the way that we relate to life, you kind of open a magic door into this realm where what's real and what's not starts to become a little bit more kind of apparent to you. And I'm hoping that we'll sort of go there in this conversation.
Yeah, wow, that went deep fast. That went deep really fast. Lines of
That's for reason.
reality. Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you just beforehand, I know you do a lot of mindfulness work, right? And
Mm.
neuroplasticity. Could you just explain what mindfulness is for you?
Sure, with pleasure. Um, so if you go to the kind of like traditional explanation, and there's some really good ones around, and the one that I'll pull out of the head is probably John Kabat-Zinn. His point is mindfulness is kind of like being present with awareness. So you're in the present moment, but you're also aware that you're being present in the world in the present moment. That's that sort of conscious of being conscious. And the difference is, if you think about kids, sometimes kids are really focused, they're really doing something, and they kind of, they stick their tongue out, and they really there, but they're not aware of themselves being there. They're completely lost in the subject of what, or in the object of what they're busy with, right? Here you're talking about being aware of doing it, and without any judgments. In other words, you're not actually running any trips about whatever it is that you are engaged with or being aware of. To simplify it, I will just say that you basically are kind of like there, and you aware of what's going on, and you're not engaging with it. It's a little bit like, think about the way that we think as a train of thoughts, and you watching the train. And what we do normally is that a thought comes up, and it's like this particular carriage in the train, and you jump into that carriage, and now you're sort of engaging with that thought. So you think, oh, like, I wish I didn't have so much for breakfast, right? And then you start to sort of think about how you eat too much, and what does it mean to the way you look, and what does it mean to your health. And you sort of gone down this kind of like rabbit hole inside that carriage, that's all about, judging and comparing, and thinking how you're going to, like how you should be versus how you are and whatnot. And what you want to do is you want to pull back. And when a thought like that comes up, instead of jumping on the carriage, you just, oh, that's just another thought coming through, right? And understanding that there is a capacity in us to observe and watch what's going on without engaging with it, that we're not actually that train of thought, that we're the one who can watch that train of thought, is that sweet spot where mindfulness really works, because it means that you are being mindful of what's going on. You're not inside, you're not engaged, you're not a victim, so to speak, of everything that's going on. And most of us, like, we just can't do it. We automatic pilot, we continuously sort of fall into those, ways of thinking, loops of thinkings about what worked and what's not, and judge it, and try to sort of compare it, to manipulate things that we want to happen, or move it towards the way that we want to think about things. And mindfulness allows you to pull back and just watch it, right? The judgment part is also quite important, because if you contemplate it, you'll realize that in order to judge, you got to compare. In other words, you got to go somewhere else and bring another piece and say, okay, well, this is either better or worse, or it's not as good as, or whatever it is that you do. And you can't be present by creating a judgment. So these are kind of like moving particles, and I think a lot of people get a little bit sort of, my experiences when I work with people is they get a little bit frustrated, because we got this sort of image of a very, austere sort of process. Got to sit on the cushion for 2 hours in a pretzel position to be able to sort of get to the honey, so to speak, get to that goodness that comes out of it. But the truth is that anytime you take a deep breath and you're present with yourself, you're doing mindfulness. And so you're looking for it, rather than as as some sort of a deep inquiry process. You look for it almost like as a simple technology to be present. And if you can continuously engage with moments where you do that, you'll start to create an understanding and an insight and an experience in your own self that allow you to be more mindful. So that's the neuroplasticity part. Up till about probably 30 years ago, 20 years ago, before we started to have MRI understanding, in other words, go into the brain and see how the brain changes over time, we only knew that the brain lose weight I think up till about the age of 25, probably. It grows, and then it starts to shrink. And from that age, when I say shrink, we're not talking about a lot, like 10,000 cells a day or whatever, but literally it stops kind of growing in that sort of sense. And so at that point, people thought that the brain is fixed. Like, you create neural pathways as you think, and you grow up and you learn stuff, and then you got your adult brain, and that's it. You're there and you're stuck with it. And now they know that that's not the case. The brain is continuously responding to the way you think. And if you think always the same kind of thoughts, then those neural pathways are laid, and there's nothing there to kind of be created. But if you start to engage with new material, or think on old material in a new way, this is where we change ourselves, if you start to do that, you're able to basically rewire the way that your brain is addressing a particular process. And neuroplasticity is really quite useful when you want to get rid of old habits or create new habits, or change the way you engage with people, the world, ideas, the planet, right? So that's where the neuroplasticity comes in. If you want to change, you need to think new thoughts.
Wow. Wow, that was amazing. That was such a beautiful condensation of those two concepts. And it's so aligned. I think if there's a word that could summarize the work we do, I think it's consciousness, right?
Mm.
Because what we're trying to do, and I think what we're being called to do now on a collective level, is really raising the level of consciousness.
Sorry, I thought I had it
No
silent.
problem.
Yeah.
So
Yes, indeed. Go on.
yeah, really, really raising that level of consciousness to, rather, like you said, of being caught up in our story where we
Mm,
see a picture and we're already having an opinion or judging or comparing or holding on to some kind of narrative.
mm,
We can just step back, like you said, and this is for me the self-awareness work that I so teach. It's what is the story, becoming aware of the
mm,
story you are telling yourself.
mm,
What is the narrative? What are the beliefs we're living in as a society and as a culture?
mm.
You know,
Yeah.
and yeah, stepping back is so powerful.
Mm,
It's funny because I try meditation sometimes. It's quite difficult for me sometimes, and I'm like I'm trying to observe the thoughts, but there's some beliefs or thoughts that, God, I just jump on that train really fast because they're just, I don't know, they have my attention in my life. But sometimes
mm,
I'm so aware that I wake up in the morning and literally I'm like, because the mind wants to engage in something, right? And so I'm like, what do I want to think about this morning?
mm, mm.
I've had that before. I'm like, what do I think about? Do I want to? I don't want to think about that. That's kind of, I'm done with that one. Yeah, what do I want to think about?
Mm.
What do I want to fill my mind with? That's going to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
good for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's beautiful. You're alluding to a principle that if you learn to work with that principle again, it opens up this space. It opens up this kind of like new ability to relate to your life in a way that is really both profound and very useful. And so, if I may, I just want to sharpen that a little bit. So, first of all, understand that we tend to kind of experience life through our senses, and we almost like assume that because we see stuff and we hear stuff and smell and taste and whatnot, that's going on in our brain, right? But of course, there's nothing in our brain that is made out of sight or smell or touch or what. No, it's all electrical impulses. So you got data that's coming in, right, by way of your senses, and that data get translated into electrical impulses that shoots around your brain, and your brain all kind of like does all its amazing thing. This is, by the way, in between your ears you have, as far as we know, the most complex um, object in the entire universe, right in between our ears. That's just organic, that is, of course, right? That is unbelievable in a sense, right? So we've got like 100 trillion cells that are all sort of firing, and working with each other. And so what that means is that from all that data that's coming in, your brain has to kind of construct your reality. And the way it does it is that it picks up the pieces that it's more familiar with and creates your reality, because it needs to work very fast to the amount of data that's coming in. So at any given point, I don't remember the exact numbers, but at any given point, you have few million bits of data that's coming into your senses. But your brain, as fast as it is and as incredible as it is, can only process few thousands at a time. And it tends to process the one that you're familiar with. In other words, you tend to reaffirm your reality around the way that you believe in things or the way that you've experienced them in the past.
That's the cognitive bias, let's say, right?
That's the cognitive bias, and that explains why when you go out with your partners and outside, have an experience, you come back and you start to talk about it, and you realize that they've had a very different experience, and you'll notice that the difference in the experience get bigger and sharper when you are in a negative kind of space, when you're angry, because that's when your negative biases starts to really sort of kick in, and rather than see what's going on, you see what you project on it, right? And so if we learn to understand that every time we engage with the world, we don't actually engage with the world, we engage with the way we think about the world. In that kind of opening, right, we have the power to ask ourselves, is this way of thinking about what's going on is useful? Is it resourceful? Does it make me stronger? Does it help the situation? Does it help me to resolve what's going on? Or does it just more about being right, or more about feeling, like I'm good and the other person is not, that sort of stuff? Because the ego, the mechanism of sort of trying to assert a sense of self, will always come up as, trying to compare yourself with someone else and dominate and avoid domination. That's what it's made for. And as a survival mechanism, it's very useful. But as unpacking very complex environmental situations, social situations, it doesn't do very well, because it always tries to kind of assert itself, when the reality of it is there's just fluidity in the interactions, and we say things and we do things with each other that don't mean anything outside the present moment, but we take them way too seriously. And so allowing ourselves to sort of just, take a breath and just be present with what's going on, and ask in that present moment is, how do I want to cultivate a thought that will bring love into the situation, that will bring relaxation into it, that will bring openness, that allow me to connect and hug and hold rather than dominate, is really quite helpful as a practice, as a mindfulness practice, so to speak.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with that cognitive bias, and I think it's called, isn't it called that part of the brain, the reticular activating system?
It's connected to that. The reticular activated system is the one that, if I'll tell you that, like, oh, I'm going to buy this amazing red car, right?
You
And
start seeing the red cars everywhere.
yes, and then the next 3 days you'll see a red car. That particular red, it's always been there, but you haven't noticed it, right? Or if you, those of you who are bilingual will relate to this. If you learn a new word in English that you never heard about before, and then suddenly you see that word twice in the newspaper the week after that, right? So there is this kind of, it's almost like you put it on your desktop, on your screen, and then you suddenly see it because now you pay attention to it. It's that sort of parts that confirms something that you believe in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is fascinating, because now taking it into the current times, what we're being called to do on
Mm,
an individual or collective level, this is fascinating because the whole cognitive bias, right, and the way our brain is programmed goes to our belief system, right? So we understand now that our brain is wired to pick up what it already knows. Yeah,
mm,
that's the bias. That's what our
yeah.
brain is going to tend to do.
Mm,
And that's probably why change is
mm,
so difficult, right? If we have to actually say, well, wait, the thing my brain is picking up on is not very useful,
mm,
or the way I am thinking about a given thing is not very useful.
mm,
And we have to actually like reshape our brain, or reshape the cognition, right? The pieces that it's picking up and how it's processing it and what it's making of it has to change a bit. And
yeah.
that requires a lot of, wow, like, first of all, becoming aware of how you're
Yes.
currently doing it.
Yeah.
And second, being able to imagine or seeing a new possibility of how
Right.
it
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah. So create a different roadmap. There's actually, in a way, I would say that there's three different parts to it. The first part is being aware of what's going on, right? The second is being aware of what you'd like to be going on, and then the relationship that you have with that. And we often get lost in the actual relationship, because we're aware of what's going on, but only in the sense of that interpretation that we discussed before, that cognitive bias. We're very aware of what we want to have, right? Like if you think about it, a lot of the angst of modern life is in the discrepancy between what happens and what we would like to happen, right? And we spend some considerable amount of time, resources, efforts to try to manipulate what's going on so it will fit the projected idea that we have about how it should look like, right?
Mm.
Where a lot of the change that can happen in terms of how we enjoy and engage fully and sort of like where we thrive is in the process of moving back from being that projection of how things should work into just first being aware of how things are in a non-judgmental way, and second, vibrating or staying with that sense of fulfillment that comes out of I know what I need to do next in order to get to a place where I thrive. In other words, rather than thinking that, oh, I want this car or I want this position, or if I had that girlfriend or that boyfriend, I'll be happy. Understanding that what we're trying to get through that projection is a sense of connectedness and security and safety and all these other things, all these other kind of core,
Basic needs. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so being cognizant of that and just say, okay, well, if that's what I'm aiming for, what is the next thing that I need to do right now to be able to facilitate it? Not because I'm attached to that happen, but because I want to be smart to the present moment in terms of taking action. And if that's what I feel will make me thrive, let me take actions toward that. And if we can do it with a little bit more of informed kind of decision making process, that is to say that we know that connection makes us thrive. We know that, like if I'll get another gadget, I'll be bored with it within 3 days. We kind of understand what's important and what's not. And we start to curtail and curate the decisions that we make to facilitate the connectedness, to facilitate service, to facilitate kindness, to facilitate compassion, which is really where we thrive as individuals and as a society. You start to sort of change the way that you relate to life, because now you're making decisions that are not about accumulations or power or fame. They're more about being present with what makes us human, which is being in love with ourselves, being in love with others, being in love with the universe, being love as such, right?
Wow, but
How
Michael,
can
I
we
think
do that?
we're like, as a collective, I think we're still really far from that, because what you just said, which I completely 100% agree with,
Mm,
requires, first of all, a level of self reflection, of understanding your own patterns and being like, wow, yeah, more money is not making me happier, right?
mm,
Reflection, lesson. So then I take action and say, well, you know what? I'm actually going to take a pay cut in order to have more vacation time, for
mm,
example, right? But not everybody's there in that
mm,
level of
mm,
reflection, understanding. And it also requires an understanding of your own needs, right?
mm,
On all levels of Maslow's pyramid. Like the
mm,
most basic, like you need to eat, sleep, that's, I think we all know we need that more or less. But the
yeah.
higher ones, like,
Mm,
the self esteem, the belonging, the fulfillment, not everybody is aware
mm,
of having those needs, and that is ultimately what we want, right? That the search for
mhm,
money or the sleeping around or whatever is
mm,
to fulfill your need for love or
yeah.
belonging or
Yeah.
feeling worthy and enough,
Mm,
right? we
yeah.
I think we don't, as a collective, we don't often tie, like, make those connections, that's really what we're looking for. So we're
Mm,
still in the trap of of setting goals and trying to achieve things that ultimately are not fulfilling our deepest needs and desires.
yeah.
So we're in a
Mm.
what's that called? A vicious circle.
Vicious cycle, and you can talk about the diseased mind, right? This is a mind that is in dis-ease because it is just focused on, this is a sort of a continuous generation to the next, to the next, to the next, where we have grown to define success as very particular things that don't actually deliver. Like if being rich, famous, and powerful was success, and it really meant that you will be successful, then you would see those people being really happy. It's usually the other way around, right? So there is something there that we do in the way that we have collectively grown to define success, which is very misguided. And we're only one generation away, right, from being able to recalibrate a lot of that if we made sure that the next generation is being informed in a different way. And I think this brings us to, we said we might go in the conversation to this subject. My humble opinion on that is that a lot of it is the fact that we've basically leached out any chance for any wisdom that comes through the feminine to be in a leadership position that makes decisions about what's important and what's not, because it's that capacity to be able to see the interconnectedness of things, and that capacity to create and nurture and bring love into the situations and make sure that, all parts of the whole are taken care, which is the wisdom that comes through the feminine. And
And
and we don't have that because for 10,000 years we've always gone for, let's go and hunt and dominate and, sort of own and all that sort of stuff. And it's not a
and,
happy place.
and for those who have not heard of this concept, I just want to bring it up. There's this concept of feminine and masculine energy, all right, which can also be seen as the yin and the yang, all right. And let's not get caught up with feminine as it being women and masculine being men, all right. They're general themes, yeah. And there are women that can embody and be very masculine in their energy, but we all have both kinds of energy. We just embody one a little bit more or embody some energy in different moments, but they're general themes, yeah. And I want to read this excerpt actually that I read from the Chopra Institute of what masculine energy is, so we get kind of familiar with that and the 10,000 years that you said of this energy being valued more than the feminine. That's what I've discovered in the past years. It's like, as a society, as a collective, these things that I'm about to read simply seem more valuable. They seem more worthy of
Mm.
attention. We give them more attention. So this is how it defined it here. Masculine energy in its purest form is associated with taking action, doing, accomplishing, making things happen, being productive and efficient, setting and achieving goals, having purpose and power, using sexual energy as fuel to create, actively manifesting from a place of action. All right. So it's very much the overdrive. Yeah. And it's a lot of driving this hyper competition, avoiding emotions at all costs because they just get in the way. Right. I have to win, step over others. So that's, and obviously the wars and domination and tyrannies that we have seen is very much a reflection of that, right? Where other aspects, like you said, of the feminine, like nurturing and emotions and embodiment, right? And feeling and creativity, right? Creativity and flow. They're kind of like, and a lot of us have that. Like as a society, I have that, right? Like kind of no strategy and direction and goals is more valuable than just flowing in creativity. In fact, listen how funny this is. One of these live sessions that I did with Matt, somebody wrote in the comments, the person like kind of realized that these chats were flowing a bit, that they didn't have a preset structure. And the person wrote in the chat, the person wrote, what, you're improvising? This is the first time and the last time I'm here. Like that's and I want to bring that up because that's just such that rejection of anything that's not structured, goal oriented. And I want to give this example of I did this embodied leadership training a few weeks ago, and it was fabulous. And it was a 3-day event. It was costly. It had a price to it that was significant, you know? And at the event, the women that were leading it, I realized in the first day, there was no agenda. The whole thing was that's how connected they are and that's how much they trust, that the whole thing was just flowing, the present moment, feeling the space and what was needed at that moment.
Mm.
And they trusted themselves so much as the trainers, teachers, you know, that they are, to just give to the space and the container and the people whatever had to be given at
Mm.
that moment.
Yeah.
And it did happen exactly in that way for the whole 3 days.
Mm.
And there was a part of me that I was like, what?
Mm.
They didn't prepare this? You know? Like, there's no structure. Like, you know what? You know, I was kind of like, and then I was just like, you know, just be here and enjoy the ride.
Mm. Yeah.
um yeah, and last thing about this, even in my own self, I have a lot of masculine energy.
Mm.
I am very goal oriented, I'm very action oriented, right?
Mm.
And one of the things I've done the most in the past 5 years was to welcome more that yin,
Mm.
that feminine, right?
Mm.
And it was like allowing a part of myself that I always rejected, which is the reflection of what we've done as a society, right?
Mm.
Reject the feminine. Like, it's the second place. It has its role is inadequate. It's
Mm.
too much,
Mm.
right? It's too little. It's and that's that sensation of the feminine sometimes being too much and it having to be put away and repressed, right?
Mm.
Because it's that force
Mm.
of creation and flow and creativity is so unpredictable
Mm.
that God forbid where it might what it might do. So let's put it away in a box, the
Mm.
masculine box, right? So we can contain it.
Yeah.
And what I've done with myself is, for example, a few years ago, is really started to dance,
Mm.
like move. And at first, I felt stupid. Like
Mm.
at first, I did. It was like my judging mind, right? Being
Mm.
like, "What are you doing?" And then I just watch the thought, and I'd be like, "Leave me alone, mind. The little voice in my head. I don't need you right now. I hear you, but." And
Mm.
I just moved and danced and just allowed myself to be
Mm.
instead of finding my worth from only doing, you know. And ah, just that last phrase is so critical because it's so tiring to always feel that you have to do and do and do
Mm.
and achieve in order to find your worth. And
Mm.
just that belief in itself is a dead end because
Yeah.
no, it doesn't, there's no amount you could do to
Mm.
feel worthy.
Yeah.
You just are worthy. That's something you are
Mm.
by
Yeah.
being, not by
Indeed.
doing.
Beautifully said. Indeed. If you look back at it, take it back, so what happened 10,000 years ago, right? Like, what is it that sort of created this sort of drag of growing and monster of engagement with life, again going back to how to engage in the present moment, which is more and more removed from how we were wired to be with each other and with Mother Earth, so to speak. Most of it has happened because we've changed the way that we have a relationship with the environment, by which we started to subjugate the environment to our benefits. In other words, agriculture, right? And it's quite interesting to see what happened at that point, because suddenly, instead of having to live within the context of nature and being able to relate to what's going on by being part of it, which is what we needed to do as hunters and gatherers, we started to manipulate nature to our benefit, and it allowed us to do a whole lot of stuff that created, wealth, and created bigger and bigger social groups like small towns and villages and cities and whatnot, and took us out of that natural being part of the cycle of nature into dominating nature in a very significant way. That's kind of the second wave of it. The first wave happened when we started to use language, because that allowed us to talk to each other and create bigger and bigger groups in order to relate to, or in order to be able to go and hunt and dominate and whatnot. which is probably about 70,000 years ago. But it's really the invention of agriculture that has made that big difference, because at that point, once we have wealth and we have cities, we need to defend them. We need to make sure that we hold on to them. So suddenly there is a need for armies, there's a need for men to fight the wars, so women need to give a lot more birth. All that sort of swing from just being able to be in some sort of a natural balance with ourselves and the environment has just gone out of whack, right? And to your point, I think my experience is that we are actually very scared of that power of the feminine, because it's not about owning and dominating, it's about being present and nurturing. And the kind of doing that comes out of that is not a doing that creates by sort of taking things and putting them together. It just allows for things to naturally sort of come up. I mean, like when someone is pregnant, she does not need to work on making a baby. It just sort of grows. This is just, the universe has its own wisdom, and it seems that the feminine is very good at allowing that wisdom to bring things back into balance, and to sort of make sure that any excesses that don't work for the greater good are sort of like, they just diminish of the cycles that are happening within nature. And there's some beautiful examples that we're learning now that kind of that sort of elucidate that. One of them is that they had an interesting experience where they brought back some wolves to I think it was Yellowstone or Yosemite, maybe it was Yosemite in the US.
Yeah, I saw that the other day.
That's right. And suddenly, right up and down the food chain, not just not just in one direction, but up and down the food chain, the whole thing sort of started to come back into balance, because they ate the deer, I think, that was getting in the way of shrubs coming up. The shrubs came up, and so little animals could sort of reside in them and whatnot. So that's one example. And the second example we've just seen, I don't know if you've seen the actual videos, but all this wildlife that's starting to come back into our cities because of the shutdown, the air is cleaning up, all that sort of stuff. And it's almost, I think it is actually humiliating in a sense for us to realize how fast the planet will get over us if something happened, right? It's like within 1 month, there's bears and deers are walking in our cities. It's not going to take that long for Mother Earth to go, whew, that was a bad one, right? Right? Get those dinosaurs 2.0 out of my face, because they're just not doing very well, right? So I do feel that if we learn to allow and encourage all of us, men and women, that capacity to hold and nurture and be present and love what is there, we'll start to sort of see a bit more balance. And to me, I have two daughters, so I'm sort of a bit biased maybe that way, but I feel that there is a revolution coming, and that revolution is coming through the feminine, and it's coming through the girls of the next generation, where they just say, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm not playing this game anymore, right? And you look at climate marches and a lot of the actions that are happening around the planet at the moment, in terms of like big stuff, big thinking, big audacious kind of goals in terms of change in the futures. Most of it is led by girls. It's beautiful.
Wow, and so for what that means for us right now, right? Right now. And I just want to really practically tie this to like today, right?
Mm.
We've all been asked to stop doing, stop going places, stop traveling, stop shopping, stop meeting, go home,
Mm.
be with yourself, with your family, sit, but stop.
Mm.
What are you seeing right now around you with people, and what do you think I mean, we've touched a lot on it, but what do we have to let go of right now
Mm. Mm.
to be able to accept what is happening?
There's two, three things that I would like to sort of bring into the discussion in this context. The first is that we have the illusion that we're in control. And when we're not in control, we spend a lot of times trying to manipulate what's going on so we gain control. right?
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, of course. So you open the tap of water and the water comes through, right? Or you switch the light on and there's electricity. Or you go to the bus station and the bus shows up. There's all these systems that work really well because we're very good at creating system. And and in a sense, that masculinity that we've discussed is extremely, adept at and honing onto the goal, and then sort of creating a structure that will help it to sort of come together and plan and create big stuff, right? Which gives us the illusion that like life is under control. And what happens to us on an individual level is that occasionally life comes and gives us a slap on the face and says, actually, you're not in control. So heaven forbid you might have a car accident, or someone passed away, suddenly someone close to you, and you realize that, hang on, life is in control, not me, right? But on a very individual kind of acute anecdotal sort of um, um, context, we tend to fall back into that illusion fairly fast, right? What happened now is that this one little, right, whether it was a pangolin or a bat, but one little wildlife animal, right, in a market in China within 6 months, like literally, I think the first person to die from COVID was end of January, so 6 or 7 months, right? And completely change our world and ripped off this crazy illusion that we have control over what's going on, right? And I think what we are invited to do is to sort of start to reflect about what is in our control. And it's not about dominating things and turning on, creating stuff. Although I want to have running water and I want to have electricity. It's not like I want to be a Luddite. I'm just saying being appreciative of our capacity to create all this. But really what is in our control is how do we behave right now? And there is an invitation for us to question and look for the opportunity to behave now in a way that is really meaningful. And it starts with the people we're with, like we stuck with them, right? And suddenly we really have to face our transgressions, our anger, our shortcomings as in our personality and our emotional makeup, and really look for opportunities to grow together with someone else and connect meaningfully and sit quietly and sort of reflect and not being able to sort of go and do stuff. Now, I don't think that a lot of it is happening, in a massive kind of way, but I think you see that under the kind of hood by way. You might have noticed, for example, that when people come on Zoom meetings, and there's lots of Zoom meetings going on, one of the things that I've noticed is that people want to connect meaningfully with those other people on the Zoom meeting. So it's not just about the work, or it's not just about the subject, or it's not just about, whatever it is that we learn. There is this sense of like yearning for connections, which is one of those core needs that we talked about, right? And we suddenly realize how important it is. Um, Another way to look into it is that even though we've got this modern world, and we've for 10,000 years we kept shaping it and shaping it and shaping it until we live in these huge concrete towers, and we literally engage with a flat piece of glass for majority of the day, right? The body mind organism was forged in a very different context. It was forged in a savannah, in a tribal kind of situation. And so if I borrow this old adage from St. Thomas Aquinas about the God-shaped hole in our heart, we're all walking around with a tribal and a wilderness-shaped holes in our heart. And we need to kind of learn to feel it. Where is our tribe, and where is our connection with the planet, with the earth, with the stars, all that sort of stuff? So there is an invitation, I think, here for us to sort of start to be a little bit more cognizant of our place within that incredible fabric. And because we have so much power to destroy it, be a little bit more intentional in how we take care of things and how we consume and how we do stuff with each other that allow us to go back into balance. And again, I'm not suggesting that anyone should just throw away everything and go and live in the bush. I'm just saying, like, on a day-to-day basis, if we can be more present with how we feel with other people, and look for opportunities to share love and connect with people. And if we look for opportunities to maybe consume less and maybe, you know, do it in a more kind of sustainable way, that is a good start for us to go to.
Wow, definitely. And I think that that is the ultimate invitation that's happening right now. It's
Mm,
that, hey, the uncertainty is so big. Like, we as a collective, the government, your boss, right? We have no idea
mm,
how long this is going to last, how bad it's going to get, when the vaccine is coming out, right? All of the things your mind tries to hold on to, like, again, manipulate, right? No, I should be able to.
mm.
Next year I wanted to travel, I don't know where. All the plans and goals, right now
Not in
everything's on
control.
hold. Yeah,
Yeah, someone else.
everything's on hold. So it's like, hey, control, bye bye.
Yeah, yeah.
Let go of the control and learn, as we've been saying
Mm,
throughout this whole talk,
mm,
to find the beauty and
mm,
the magic in the present moment.
mm,
And it's so sorry, it's so simple but so
mm,
powerful, because it's like, when you really understand that the present moment is the only thing that exists, right? That the future is a possibility, the past is gone. They're all like concepts that we hold in our mind, right? The memories and the possibilities of what could be, but the only thing that's real,
mm.
like, you know what I mean? The only thing that's real is me and you right now here. I don't, you're kind of real on the screen, but I don't know. and and when you realize the magic in that, and I've always had this lens, but now I it's been magnified, because sometimes I
Mm,
wake up and I'm just like, the luxury is being able to breathe, having some food on your table,
mm,
having the sunlight coming in through your window.
mm,
That is the new luxury.
mm,
It's having a sofa to sit on. It's having being able to share a conversation with a loved one. It's the magic and the beauty and the fascination
mm,
in the simplest things that the present moment brings. And when we can have that lens and those reminders, though,
mm,
that's
mm,
when we start opening, right? That bias. It's like, how can we start seeing now
mm,
beauty and magic in the
mm,
simplest
mm.
of things that are in my present right now, instead of
Yeah,
trying to hold on so badly to the ideas you have of, I should be able to go outside and my rights have been taken away from me because life should be X and Y and Z. And the fact is, it's not.
mm,
And the sooner you accept what is, well,
yeah,
the more well-being and peace you'll
mm,
find within yourself.
yeah. Indeed, that's beautiful. What you're talking about is actually, it's got a name, right? And
Oh yeah.
we talked about neuroplasticity, but there's this concept called positive neuroplasticity, right? So because we are wired for negativity, and the reason why we wired for negativity is because it helped us survive. So what happens is that you're, 50,000 years ago, you're on the savannah and you're heading towards the water hole, and there is a tree of mangoes or a bush of berries or something for you to eat, and you kind of walk past it and you didn't notice it. That's not a big deal, because you'll walk there again the next day, or you'll notice another bush of berries or whatnot. In other words, the price you pay for not noticing the bush of berries is not a very high price. But if there is a cave where there is there's a bunch of hyenas that are living there, or if you're another part of the planet and there's a tiger there or whatever, and you didn't notice that, or you didn't pay attention to that, you'll never eat another mango in your life. And so the price for not understanding or paying attention to the negative experiences is much higher. And what happened is, of over thousands of generations of evolution, the nice, happy-go-lucky kind of hippie people, they didn't survive. They didn't have children. The one who went to hug the tree got eaten by the tiger, and they were the one that were gnarly and kind of like, what's going to go wrong and how am I going to protect myself? Those are the ones that had babies, right? And if you compound that over thousands of generations, you get to a point where our mind is wired for negativity. And in fact, negative experiences, this is sort of now scientifically sort of proven. Negative experiences, I think the numbers are something like 6 times faster and more impactful in terms of how you register them than a positive experience. If you have a great, say you had a great dinner with a friend, you might remember it the next day, and you'll be happy about it, right? But you won't it wouldn't leave a much of a residual sort of impact on you. But if you had an argument with a friend at the dinner, you'll keep kind of consuming that argument. What do you do in your head? You're kind of having the argument over and over and over and over again in your head. Most of it trying to justify to yourself why it's fair enough that you feel angry about it, right? That sort of stuff. So we tend to mull over negativity. And what you want to do is you want to learn to switch that back into what Rick Hanson, which is the guy who developed this model of positive neuroplasticity, he calls building a bank of good. You want to deposit conscious, present experiences of small, happy stuff to rewire yourself towards being able to kind of appreciate the small, happy moments, which we tend to sort of just fly through and not really notice them. But in reality, they could make a big difference, because over time, if you do that, it's not just that you notice the stuff when it happens, you tend to look, your cognitive bias sort of shift into looking for the positive stuff, because that's what you're used to. You're used to now looking for, what feels great about it. So eating a piece of fruit and being really present with it, instead of, sort of watching another episode on the television while it happens, and all that sort of stuff. How do you rewire your brain for positivity is a really useful approach. The other thing is, I thought I might read something which is very congruent with what you mentioned before, in
Yeah.
terms of our relationship with the planet, so to speak. And this came up on my feed, and it was posted by Julian Lennon, who's the son of John Lennon, but he specifically said he didn't write it. Someone sent it to him. But I thought it was absolutely exquisite. And this is what it says. He says, "We fell asleep in one world and woke up in another. Suddenly, Disney is out of magic. Paris is no longer romantic. New York doesn't stand up anymore. The Chinese wall is no longer a fortress, and Mecca is empty. Hugs and kisses suddenly became weapons, and not visiting parents and friends becomes an act of love. Suddenly you realize that power, beauty, money are worthless and can't get you the oxygen you're fighting for. The world continues and its life, and it's beautiful. It only puts humans in cages. I think it is sending us a message. You are not necessary. The air, earth, water, and sky without you are just fine. When you come back, remember that you are my guests, not my masters." So,
Wow, I love that
an
so much.
invitation for us to reflect.
When you come back, it's like stay put.
You learn something, yeah,
But
maybe,
when you come back,
yeah.
remember you are my guests, not
and
my
and we
masters.
probably will come back, but I do think that we are at yeah, it's interesting to watch, but we tend to kind of try and understand, see, what's going on a narrative level. And so if the narrative is complex, it's hard to understand, right? So you look at economics, or you look at geopolitical sort of situations, and you try to understand it. And the more complex it is, the more crazy it seems, and you sort of like, you just can't make sense of it, right? But often there is a sort of almost like an architecture or a DNA to a situation, that if you tend to sort of bring your thinking down to, okay, well, what's the architecture, or what is the DNA of a situation, then it sort of starts to make sense. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I want you to think of what's going on now around the world. And if you try and understand it on a narrative level, it's just too crazy. But really what you're seeing is a shift from old consciousness into a new consciousness, or maybe from an old consciousness which is very masculine into a new consciousness which is more feminine, but really is a much older consciousness that we lost, right? And so we need to move, and we are moving from this the dichotomy of seeing the other as different, to seeing the other as part of who I am. There is a South African philosophy called Ubuntu, which basically summarized as, I am who I am because of who you are. I am not separate. I'm not just in my own little bubble. I do that in my own head, but the truth is, I'm not separate. And if you look at the DNA of how things are on a physical level, there's mostly space. There isn't anything out there, like the entire human race. If you can somehow suck out all the vacuum and all the space, right, that is inside the atoms that made all human beings on the planet, and you just left out with actual matter, there's this much matter in the entire human race. Like that piece of my finger is how much matter there is if you took 7.5 billion people and somehow kind of shrunk them, if they all went into a black hole, say, or
Wow, I didn't know that much.
that's all there is. The rest is space, right? And other stuff that you sort of you might have heard the thing that you made out of stardust, right? Well, that sounds kind of nice and kind of, it's very poetic, but it's true. And how do you know that's true? Is because the only iron is not getting created. The actual iron molecules, they don't get created anywhere else except when you get galaxies colliding and creating this massive super sort of energetic interactions that happens billions and billions of light years ahead and away from us, and yet we are every cell in your blood has got an iron core to it, right? So we are literally made of stardust, right? So that interconnectedness, we don't see that because of course we live the experience from within what feels like a very separate body mind organism that is interacting with the other, but on a very on a very sort of cosmic and yet also grounded level of the physics of it, we all very interconnected. And so we need to move from that space of us and them, me and mine, into like us together with whatever is going on. And I think what you're seeing is that transition. We're seeing that transition of old consciousness that is fighting for its life, right? Like the Trump kind of mindset of like grand verbosity about how I am the best and this is what's important, and this real kind of emotional immaturity of just wanting to be like a little kid that dominates everything, into this more mature interconnected awareness that comes through, for example, leaders like Jacinta Ardern in our neighbors in New Zealand, which is really how feminine leadership sort of shows up through it, understands it, and makes it makes everything sort of come together to work together. And one of the, we talked about the impact of this crisis. One of the most beautiful, I think, outcomes of it, that suddenly science is back in the driving seat, right? Like after being, like all this climate change kind of stuff that's been going on for the last 20 years, there's a massive amount of pushback on science as is, it's not important and it's not really relevant. And these are just people sitting in their ivory towers and wanting grants or whatever. Well, guess what? Everyone wants a scientist now in their backyard because we need people to find a vaccine, right? So I think recognition of science, recognitions of, cleaners and drivers and nurses and teachers, whoa, there's real rebalancing from this old dominating power, sort of fame kind of model of thinking into how do we come together to deal with this?
Wow,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think Trump is the perfect representation of this kind of untamed, unconscious masculine energy. It's
Yeah.
incredible for I think that really sums it up. I mean, not in
Yeah.
it doesn't sum it up. I mean because both of them have high vibrating energy or low.
Mm,
For me, my personal opinion is that he's the quite low vibrating masculine
mm,
energy in
mm.
its pure essence. So, I wanted to leave everyone with some really practical tips of how they can start connecting with the feminine in their house now, and we touched on some of them, but some of those things are as simple as meditation, of course, right? And like breath work, and that the breath and sound are just two ways that you can go back into your body. When I mean sound, I don't mean just music, but I mean actually making sound yourself. right? So sometimes when I breathe, I'm very much like, and I just kind of reconnect with my body. So, and it might feel weird or awkward, and who cares? Leave the judging mind to the
Mm,
side, all right? Because
mm,
if it's not serving you, what's the point? Yeah. So,
mm,
really find dance that connecting and use your senses.
mm,
Use your senses to connect with anything.
mm,
Appreciate what your
mm,
senses pick up on, right? What you hear, what you can touch, right? A lot of tantra, which I've been reading a lot about lately, is I remember I went to this workshop here in Melbourne like 2 years ago. It was called "What the fuck is tantra?" And I remember I had to do this exercise of just like touching and being fascinated with my own hand, you know, and it seems like so simple or silly, but again, if that's the judgment, that's again the masculine valuable goal. What's the point? Why? Just let it be. All
mm,
right. And I've always quite, I can't believe I'm alive. I can't believe
mm,
I'm like, I just look at my hands and I'm just like, I'm here right now. And one day I will not be.
mm.
That just for me is incredible, right?
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
Mm, yeah. It's interesting because there's both from a Western and an Eastern sort of tradition. There is this um, concept of how rare is the chance for you to be born as a human being, right? And I can't remember all the details of the Western one, but the Western one sort of takes, it's very, sort of very mathematical. It takes the oddities of, your mother and your father meeting and sort of coming together, and it's just one. It's an unbelievable, tiny number of you actually with your genetic makeup coming up together as you are on this planet. And the equivalent from the East is the story of like a circle the size of a life-saving kind of the orange and white sort of whatever you
Yeah.
call them, the wheels that they throw off from the from
Yeah,
so,
the
so
life-saving float, yeah.
that's right. So one of them floating on the on an ocean, on the entire ocean, like the whole surface area of the ocean on the planet, and that there is one turtle that comes up to breathe every so many years, and the chances for that one turtle to poke its head through the head, through that wheel is kind of like how rare a human birth is. Um, just a thought in terms of like practical stuff, and I'm totally with you, like going back to that positive neuroplasticity. When you eat an apple, enjoy eating an apple, enjoy it with your mouth, enjoy it with your smell, enjoy it with your sense of touch, holding it, enjoy it with with looking at it, sharing it with someone, all that sort of stuff. These are, they sound so banal and unimportant, but the truth is that it's just, if you do 5, 6, 8, 10 moments a day where you really appreciate just little simple pleasures are the best, like the song, you'll find that over time you start to be more geared towards that. The second thing is, if I take back to this idea of how do we strip away, big, sorry, is that, can you hear me? Because someone just started a blender in the
Yeah,
other,
no, we can't hear it, the blender.
it's all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, if you take it, that idea of stripping the narrative into like what is the DNA, one of the fascinating things when you contemplate it is that every decision that you make in life is actually, there's only one decision that you make over and over and over and over again. And that decision is either you're going to create more harmony, more connectedness, more, you know, greater kind of good, or you're going to create more separation and more sort of, you know, um, exploitations and whatever it is. In other words, every decision that you make either going to bring you towards connecting with the whole or away from connecting with the whole. And if we can learn to, if
Mm,
you teach yourself to stop before we make a decision and say, okay, what is the implication of this decision in terms of my interconnectedness? What is the implication of this decision in terms of how I show up for my values, for what is important? There's a beautiful um, ideation of this that comes through the American Indian tradition, where they say, what is the impact 7 generations henceforth? Like, if I'm going to do this now, how this is going to impact 7 generations from me, right? And then you kind of it sort of it makes you realize that you're not operating in a vacuum, that you are interconnected, right? So if we can look for opportunities to make decisions that are more congruent with creating goodness, with being of service, with allowing ourselves to bring our joy into the world rather than to take something from the world, we'll find that over time again we become more mindful, we become more creative in that sort of nurturing feminine way, and we probably find that we're happier.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And that we are more isolated and more connected than ever right now because we're living something on like on such a global level. I think it's unprecedented that we're all so affected by something at the same time.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, and what you said about the apple, yeah, that's so simple but so powerful. And a few other things is finding that sense of community, right? Connecting with others. You can, like, for example, the event that I run called Fuck the Small Talk, right? That's that place where you come and you have these connections and conversations with people.
Mm.
Um, find and to the people in your house as well, right? So anybody that you can, that sense of community is
Mm.
also that way to nurture that feminine. And
Mm.
yeah, I think that practicing right now what it means to connect with your intuition
Mm.
is a beautiful thing. All right. It's such a time to go inward. That's what the feminine is, right? It's the masculine is outward and the feminine is in.
Mm.
So God, take advantage of this
Mm.
period of time to go in, because I don't know if there will ever be a time that we're being called to go in more than right now. So yeah. Well, I think we hit our time limit more or less. If there's any questions, and Dianti, you wrote to me. This will be up on our YouTube channel if Michael is okay with it. So yeah, and if anybody has any thoughts, comments, please go ahead and write. And if not, is there any last thoughts or comments, Michael, that you want to leave us with?
I'll just give people a chance to see if anyone wants to ask any question.
Well, if they do, right, I just want to ask you what has helped you connect with the feminine throughout your life, besides your two daughters?
It goes back to this sort of intergenerational um, idea, like we basically, I think I was lucky to grow up in a household where my dad, was less of that sort of typical alpha male who was, and was very thoughtful to kind of try and allow for a balanced sort of household in terms of what's going on in energetically in the house to start with. I think that was helpful for sure. But I grew up in Israel. I went to the army. I was a super soldier. I actually thrived to be the best soldier I could be because I bought into this narrative of like that's how we have to show up as young men. And it took a lot of time either bashing cushions or sitting on cushions for me to try and figure out what's the narrative that I've been fed as this is true and what's real. And the beauty of it is we're not talking about something like some sort of a super skill set that we have to kind of go and learn and practice for 20 years to become expert. We all, like you said at the beginning of the conversation, we all have a masculine and feminine energy that's arising and playing within us. So it's just a matter of kind of like allowing for it to sort of surface. And so you sort of alluding to a fairly interesting kind of concept that we don't really have time to unpack. But is it is it me changing on the inside that allowed me to experience a whole lot of beautiful feminine energy on the outside, right? Or is it that the outside was there and that allowed for the inside to sort of come up and kind of meet it, right? And without getting into too much philosophy around it, The world doesn't happen in vacuum to you. Like what your experience, the way that the way that experiences arise in us is very connected to the way that experience is happening to us.
Mhm.
And the world, like there's no duality in a sense in the way that you experience the world. You just happens to perceive it as duality because you have senses that perceive other, but that is actually an illusion of the mind, in a sense. And so um, I,
Wow, that has to be
I
part
was
2
just
of this.
exposed enough to it, I think, in some ways, to be able to start to look for it and understand it. And partly being a soldier, in a sense, brought it. I got out of that experience thinking that if 80% of the decisions on the planet were made by women, it wouldn't look like that. I'm pretty convinced, right? And at the moment, it seems if you just take ratios of leadership, that 80% of the decisions are made by men. So obviously that's out of balance, and that started my journey on kind of looking to, well, where is, what would it look like? What would it feel like when it's, yeah.
Wow, first of all, I'm so happy to hear you say that because I think I've never heard, I mean, not that I've talked too much about this, but I've never heard a man say that I've always said that the world would look very, very different if women were also at least in 50% decision making, because the
Yeah.
decisions we make are just have different values behind them, you know?
Mm.
Not all women, of course, but this kind of
Well, it's the feminine,
feminine.
let's leave
Yeah,
men and women out of it.
yeah, the feminine.
If feminine wisdom was guiding the decisions that we made, it would look different, right? And
Absolutely.
again, if you go back to that hunters and collectors time, you had the two columns of wisdoms coming right through the tribe and feeding each other and supporting each other. So the older women were there, and they were there to support the mothers. The mothers were there to support the teenager girls, and all that wisdom would come through. We completely decimated that model. It's gone, and so we don't have any of that role modeling. It's like how rare, like everyone, I think, I hope that everyone on this call thought that, how rare and fresh was, when suddenly you saw someone like, again, I mentioned here again, Jacinta Ardern as a leader comes in and just doing these amazing things. And you go, wow, that's actually not amazing. It's just what it is. I mean, it is amazing, but it's amazing because it's so rare. It should be the normal. Thinking about how does this impact everyone should be the normal. Why is it so rare? Because we've just gone so far out of it. So
Yeah, and the other day, my partner told me, I think we think that as a collective or society, we're much more advanced than we are.
mm,
We think we have this illusion that, oh, we are, but if you just take a look at the number of like, ooh, the example he gave me, which I think was very powerful, is how can we expect there not to be racism if there's still homicide? Like if
mm,
we're still killing each other, right? Not even out of racism, like literally just people that are of our race, if there's still so much hate, if there's still
mm,
such basic things like taking people's lives, how can we expect on top of that just to be very open-minded and allow all,
mm,
we're so far, like there's so much inner work to be
mm,
done still,
mm,
as a collective. And
mm. Yeah, yes and no.
yeah,
Yes, in the sense that you're right. We are massively more backward than we'd like to think in some ways. And, like for me as an immigrant in Australia, I was horrified to see how much domestic violence we have here. You would have expected we'll be beyond that sort of stuff. And no, in the sense that it only takes, again, one generations of, teaching. Like if you take kids and you didn't fill their heads with any prejudices about anything, they'll play with each other regardless of their colors. They don't need to know that this color is good and this color isn't, right? If I take someone out of their environment and heaven forbid they completely lost their memory, and I take you out and you lost your memory and I pluck you in another country, you don't have a story by which to go through that explains why you like this type of people and not that type of people. It's only the story that is created through our culture and through our environment that suggests that a certain kind of story is better than another. Ideally, like there isn't any story there. There's just again, there's just perception of the present moment that is interpreting what's going on according to a certain set of data that was given to us in our childhood that says, like if you're a boy, that's, you more, like that you should speak. And if you're a girl, it's unbelievable how many girls were told to be quiet and shut up when they were young. Because this idea of, sort of a boisterous girls just gets on people's nerve. I think, again, it's, because we're afraid of that power, so we want to kind of push it down. But in my classes, I've started to ask this after it came up in one of the classes, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. So I wanted to kind of see if that's the pattern. Continuously, every time I've asked this question, I said, how many girls were allowed to, were told to shut up when they were young? And practically every woman in the room would raise her hand, and then I would ask how many boys, and maybe one of the men would do that. So this is like this sort of pernicious mindset, cultural sort of drag that we've been dragging with ourselves. One generation can fix it if we did the right work with the next generation, and it's upon us to do that as individuals, with the people that we talk to and the people that we share our lives with, and certainly the next generation that we interact. Make sure that they know that there is no reason for them to dislike someone else because they look different, so because they got something else something different between their legs, so to speak, right? It's like, it's just humans. That's all it is.
Absolutely. And I think that's the lesson takeaway we can give everyone is, hey,
Yeah.
you can take full responsibility for your life, how you lead your life, and how you impact the community and people around you. And if everyone took full responsibility for that, instead of trying to change the world, right? You just take care of yourself and those around you,
Yeah.
that's already the biggest work and purpose that you could have.
Mm.